The papers hit the table before he even sat down. "Sign it, Daniel," Vivian said. "Today, in front of everyone, if that's what it takes." The restaurant was full. Waiters froze mid-step. Two men from her board sat at the next table, pretending to check their phones. Daniel Ashworth looked at the folder, then at his wife of 11 years. Her diamond earrings caught the light the way they always did when she wanted to be looked at. "You could have done this at home," he said quietly. "I wanted witnesses." She smiled, the same smile she used in interviews. "So nobody says later that I was cruel." He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "Fine," he said. "Send it to my lawyer." Vivian laughed, short and sharp. "Your lawyer? You mean the man who does your taxes?" She turned to the men at the next table, loud enough for half the room to hear. 11 years married to a man who still thinks a hardware store is a career. I built an empire, and he built a workbench. She looked back at Daniel, almost gentle now, the way people are gentle right before the worst thing they'll ever say. "You could never have kept up with Ashworth Cross Manufacturing. You know that, right? It was never yours. It was never even close to yours." Daniel folded his napkin and set it beside his plate. "Take care of yourself, Vivian," he said, and walked out into the afternoon light. Nobody in that restaurant knew the truth. Nobody, including Vivian, understood what had already been set in motion 11 months earlier, quietly, without a single raised voice. In 1 week, the company she had just called an empire would have a new name on the ownership documents. And she would be the last person in the state to find out whose name that was. 3 years before that lunch. Daniel Ashworth was exactly the man Vivian described at dinner parties. Steady, unremarkable, easy to overlook. He ran a small precision parts workshop on the edge of town, the kind of place with grease-stained concrete floors and a coffee machine older than some of the apprentices. He had built it himself, starting with a single rented bay behind a tire shop. His father had taught him to work with his hands before he taught him to read. "A man who understands machines will always eat," his father used to say, wiping down a wrench with the same rag every night of his life. "A man who understands people will always be robbed by someone who understands machines better." Daniel had laughed at that as a boy. He didn't laugh at it anymore. When he met Vivian Cross, she was already the heir apparent to her family's manufacturing conglomerate, a woman who walked into rooms like she owned the air in them. She liked that Daniel didn't perform for her. She liked, for a while, that he didn't need anything from her. Then Ashworth Cross Manufacturing was born, her company. Her name first by her own quiet insistence, though the world assumed it was a partnership of equals. Daniel's small workshop was folded into the larger business as a subsidiary, a footnote, a tax-efficient acquisition dressed up as a marriage. He never asked for a title. He never asked for shares. He built quality control systems that saved the company millions and let his wife's name sit on every press release. He told himself that was fine. For years it was. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in March, in the parking garage under the company's downtown tower. Daniel had come in early to drop off a signed vendor contract for the plant in Ohio. He wasn't supposed to be there before 7. Neither was Marcus Chen, Vivian's longtime CFO. Standing beside her car with a folder Daniel recognized instantly, the same Navy folder used for board-level financial disclosures. "Didn't expect to see you here," Marcus said, too quickly. "Just dropping something off," Daniel said, and meant it. But he noticed the folder. He noticed how Marcus angled his body slightly, like a man hiding a hand of cards. And he noticed, 3 weeks later, that a subsidiary called Cross Meridian Holdings had been registered in Delaware, with an address that matched a mailbox rental service 2 blocks from the office. He didn't say anything. He didn't confront anyone. He started paying closer attention instead. His assistant, a sharp, quiet woman named Renata Ibarra, had worked for Daniel's original workshop since before the merger. She had a gift for noticing things: an invoice that didn't match a shipment, a signature that leaned differently on a Friday than it had on a Monday. "Mr. Ashworth," she said one evening, long after the office had emptied, Did you know your signature was used on the Meridian formation documents? Daniel looked up slowly. I never signed anything called Meridian. I know, Renata said. That's what worries me. She placed a printout on his desk. The signature was close. Close enough to pass a glance, not close enough to survive a forensic comparison. Daniel studied it for a long moment. Don't tell anyone we've seen this, he said. Not yet. What do we do? He thought of his father's rag, sliding along a wrench, slow and patient, never rushing the job. We watch, he said, and we start keeping our own records. Everything. Every email. Every meeting. Every signature. Quietly, that was the beginning of what Daniel would later think of, in his own mind, as the notebook, though it was never really one notebook. It became a locked drawer, then a small fireproof safe, then an encrypted drive that only he and one lawyer could access. The lawyer was not the tax attorney Vivian liked to mock at dinner parties. His name was Harold Weiss, a semi-retired corporate litigator Daniel had quietly hired under a separate LLC 8 months before that humiliating lunch. Harold had spent 30 years untangling exactly the kind of ownership schemes now forming inside Ashworth Cross. You understand what you're describing, Harold told him during their first meeting, in an office with no nameplate on the door. If Meridian Holdings was used to siphon manufacturing contracts away from the parent company, and your signature was forged on the formation documents, that's not just a marital problem. That's fraud. I know, Daniel said. Then why aren't we filing something right now? Daniel looked out the window at the plant floor visible 3 blocks away, the one his father had once welded pipe fittings in for $11 an hour. Because right now, it's her word against mine, and her name is on every wall in that building, he said. I need more than a signature. I need the whole structure. Every transfer, every account. I need it so complete that there's no argument left to have. Harold studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Patient man, he said. I had a good teacher, Daniel said. Over the following year, while Vivian grew more distant and more dismissive at home, Daniel became someone he barely recognized in the mirror, not colder, exactly, but sharper. Focused in a way that frightened him a little. He hired a forensic accountant named Priya Nair, recommended by Harold, who worked from a small office 2 states away so nothing could be traced back through local firms Vivian's family had relationships with. Priya spent 4 months quietly reconstructing the money trail behind Meridian Holdings. What she found was worse than forgery. Vivian and Marcus Chen had been routing a portion of the company's most profitable manufacturing contracts through Meridian, then billing the parent company inflated consulting fees for services that didn't exist. Over 3 years, nearly $11 million had moved through accounts that led back, eventually, to a trust set up in Vivian's name alone, one that pointedly excluded any future claim Daniel might have as a spouse. She was preparing to leave you a long time before that lunch, Priya told him over a secure call. This wasn't a sudden decision. Look at the dates. The trust was formed 19 months ago. Daniel sat with that for a long time after the call ended. He thought about the early years sleeping in his truck outside the first workshop because he couldn't afford both rent and a new lathe. He thought about his mother, quietly selling her wedding ring to cover a missed loan payment, never telling him until years later. He thought about the promise he'd made his father before he died, that he would never let anyone take from him what he'd built with his own hands, not out of anger, but because a man's work was the only thing that couldn't be forged, only stolen. He wasn't going to let it be stolen. At home, Vivian noticed nothing. She saw a husband who worked late, who traveled more for supplier audits, who had become, if anything, more agreeable. She mistook his calm for surrender. You've gotten quiet, she said one night, not unkindly, almost curious, the way a person studies an animal that has stopped fighting a leash. I've had a lot to think about, Daniel said. About us? About a lot of things. She didn't ask further. She had already, in her own mind, moved past him. Her attention had shifted to Marcus Chen and to a man named Preston Yale. An investor circling the company with an offer to acquire and restructure Ashworth Cross's manufacturing division, an offer that Priya's research showed was designed to strip out the profitable segments and leave the original founding subsidiary, Daniel's own workshop, holding the debt. Daniel let it happen. He let every meeting proceed. He let every document get drafted. He needed the plan finished before he moved. The final piece came from security footage. Renata had noticed, months earlier, that the after-hours access logs for the executive floor showed Marcus Chen entering the building on nights when the board's official calendar showed no meetings scheduled. Daniel, through Harold, obtained the footage legally, as a listed board member of the original merged entity, a technicality Vivian had never bothered to remove, because she had never imagined Daniel would use it. The footage showed Marcus and Preston Yale meeting late at night with a third man Daniel didn't initially recognize, an outside auditor who, it turned out, had been paid through Meridian to sign off on financial statements that hid the fraud from the rest of the board. Priya matched the payments. Harold drafted the filings. Daniel signed nothing until every piece connected to every other piece, until the picture was so complete that no lawyer on Vivian's side could argue their way around it. 14 months of quiet work. Then, on an ordinary Thursday, Vivian filed for divorce and demanded he sign away any claim to the company in a public restaurant, in front of witnesses, certain there was nothing left for him to fight with. She had no idea the fight had already been won. 6 hours after that lunch, Daniel sat in Harold's office with Priya on a video call and a folder of his own thicker than the one Vivian had slid across the table. "You're sure about this?" Harold said, not because he doubted the evidence, but because once they filed, there was no quiet path back. "I've been sure for a year," Daniel said. He picked up the phone. The first call was to the 3 members of the Ashworth Cross board who weren't beholden to Vivian's family men, who had been growing uneasy about Meridian's numbers for months, but had lacked the proof to say so out loud. Daniel laid it out for them in careful, unemotional language. The forged signature, the shell company, the inflated fees, the trust, the outside auditor paid to look away. "I have documentation for every piece of this," he said. "Forensic accounting, footage, banking records. I'd like to call an emergency board session." There was a long silence on the line. "Why are you telling us this, Daniel?" one of them finally asked. "You're not even an officer." "I'm the founder of the subsidiary that built this company's reputation for quality before it had a name that mattered," Daniel said. "And I'm the majority holder of Ashworth Precision Holdings, which, as of an ownership restructuring completed 11 days ago, controls the parent license for every patent this company manufactures under. Nothing ships without that license. Not to Meridian, not to Preston Yale, not to anyone. The silence this time was different. "You bought back the patent rights." "I never sold them," Daniel said quietly. "My father held the original manufacturing patents personally before the merger. Vivian's family always assumed the merger folded those rights permanently into Ashworth Cross. It didn't. It licensed them, on a renewable term, expiring this year. I simply chose not to renew the license to the parent company. I renewed it instead to a company I control outright." He let that sit. "In 6 hours," he added, "when the emergency board session convenes, every contract Meridian Holdings currently holds becomes unenforceable, because none of the underlying manufacturing can legally proceed without a license Vivian no longer has access to. I'd like the board to see the fraud evidence before then, so no one mistakes this for a hostile move. It isn't. I'm trying to save the company my father's work built, not destroy it." The emergency session happened that night. Vivian arrived furious, dismissive, certain this was some clumsy, desperate stunt from a man she'd spent a decade underestimating. She sat down across the same boardroom table where years earlier she'd made a young, quiet engineer sign a merger agreement without reading every clause. Daniel didn't raise his voice once. He laid out the timeline. The Meridian formation documents with the forged signature, confirmed by 2 independent handwriting analysts. Priya's account of $11 million in fraudulent consulting fees. The footage of Marcus Chen and Preston Yale meeting with the compromised auditor. The trust formed 19 months earlier, timed almost exactly with the start of the fraud. Marcus Chen didn't even try to argue. He asked to leave the room and didn't come back. Vivian sat perfectly still, the color draining slowly from her face as each piece landed. She had built her entire life on being the smartest person in every room she entered. She was only now understanding that the quietest person in the room had been 3 steps ahead of her for over a year. "You planned this," she said finally, her voice unsteady for the first time Daniel could remember. "All of it. The whole time." "I didn't plan the fraud, Vivian," Daniel said. "You did that. I just made sure it couldn't hide behind my name or my father's patents any longer. You could have told me. Before it went this far." "I tried, once," Daniel said. 2 years ago, in the parking garage, I asked you directly what Meridian was. You told me not to worry about things I didn't understand." He looked at her for a long moment, and there was no triumph in his face, only tiredness. "I'm not here for revenge," he said. "I'm here because the people on this floor, the machinists, the line supervisors, the apprentices who came up the same way I did deserve a company that isn't quietly being hollowed out by people who never had to sleep in a truck to build anything." The board voted that night to suspend Vivian's operational authority pending a full independent audit. Preston Yale's acquisition offer collapsed within 48 hours once word spread that the underlying manufacturing licenses were no longer controlled by the parent entity. Marcus Chen resigned before he could be formally removed, and the outside auditor's firm was reported to the state licensing board. Daniel didn't take Vivian's title. He didn't want it. Instead, he restructured Ashworth Precision Holdings into a licensing partner for the manufacturing division, with new leadership drawn from the plant floor rather than the boardroom. He promoted a young production supervisor named Denise Whitfield, who had spent 6 years quietly flagging quality issues nobody in management wanted to hear about, to lead the division. He made sure the pension fund, which Priya's audit revealed had also been quietly underfunded during the Meridian years, was fully restored before a single legal settlement was paid to anyone, including himself. He kept his workshop separate, the way it had always been in his heart, even when its name had been buried inside someone else's. Vivian's family eventually settled the divorce quietly, out of public view, in a way that protected what remained of the company's reputation more than it protected hers. She kept a portion of her personal wealth. She lost the company that had defined her entire adult life, not because Daniel took it from her, but because she had built its downfall herself, one forged signature at a time, and he had simply refused to let it be hidden any longer. He didn't gloat. He didn't grant interviews. When a local reporter asked him, months later, what he wanted people to understand about what happened, he thought for a long moment before answering. "My father used to say a man who understands machines will always eat," Daniel said. "I used to think that meant something about tools. I think now he meant something else. Machines don't lie. Numbers don't lie. People do. If you're patient enough and honest enough, the truth eventually runs the same way a well-built machine runs. It finds its own level, on its own time. You don't have to force it. You just have to make sure you're still standing there when it does." He went back to the workshop floor after that interview, the way he did most evenings, and helped an apprentice recalibrate a machine that had been running slightly off-true for weeks. A small thing, easy to miss, unless you were the kind of person who paid attention. He always had been. The end.